My mother-in-law's blow burned, but my husband's quiet pierced deeper. Lily rose, then declared, "Mother, you've struck the proprietor here." I dabbed blood from my lip and grinned, "Marco, kindly escort these visitors out." Their reality shattered in my own dining hall. Can you imagine the sting of a slap? Not from a stranger, but from your own mother-in-law, right in the middle of a fancy restaurant. My head snapped back, the taste of blood in my mouth, but the real shock? It wasn't her hand. It was the icy calm that settled over me as I watched my husband avert his gaze and realized, with terrifying clarity, they were sitting in my restaurant, plotting my downfall on my dime. You won't believe what happened next. My name is Natalie Reyes. And to the outside world, specifically the glossy, filtered world my husband inhabits, I'm just a lucky 35-year-old housewife. According to the narrative his mother loves to spin at her charity luncheons, I'm the supportive spouse who stumbled into the orbit of a brilliant, self-made entrepreneur. A woman whose biggest daily decision involves choosing between Pilates or yoga. They see the designer clothes, the quiet demeanor, and they just assume I'm a passenger in Derek's high-speed success story. They have no idea I built the engine. They have no idea I poured the fuel. And they certainly have no idea that the very ground they were about to stomp all over tonight belonged to me. I remember standing in front of the full-length mirror in the hallway of our suburban colonial, a house I bought through a trust 2 years ago, adjusting the strap of my emerald silk dress. It was vintage, understated, expensive in a way that didn't scream for attention. That was the difference between me and the Vaughns. They liked money that shouted. I preferred wealth that whispered. My reflection showed a woman who looked calm, maybe a little tired around the eyes, but completely composed. Ready for battle. But inside? My mind was a flurry of balance sheets and profit margins. 7 years ago, I'd sold Brightside Logic, the tech startup I co-founded, for a sum that meant I never had to work another day in my life. But I wasn't built for leisure. So, quietly, meticulously, I funneled a significant portion of that capital into creating Reyes Hospitality Group, a holding company protected by layers of anonymity and nominee directors. I own 6 of the highest-performing restaurants in the city. One of them? The Glass House. And that's exactly where Derek was taking me tonight, to celebrate his new deal. Natalie, are you coming? Mother hates it when we're late. Derek's voice drifted up the stairs, tight with an impatience he was barely trying to mask. Coming. I replied, my voice steady. I picked up my clutch and checked my phone one last time. There was a text from Eleanor Vaughn, my mother-in-law. It read, "Looking forward to seeing you. We need to have a serious talk about the future tonight." My stomach tightened. Not with fear, no. With a familiar exhaustion. Eleanor was a woman who truly believed the sun rose and set on her son's shoulders. To her, I was just the middle-class girl with a Latina surname who had somehow tricked her golden boy into marriage. She tolerated me because I was presentable, but she never missed an opportunity to remind me of the hierarchy. She'd critique my wine choice, my lack of knowledge about her specific country club's history, or my past career in computers, which she viewed as blue-collar work performed in an office. She had never outright insulted me in public, preferring the death by a thousand cuts method of polite condescension. But tonight felt different. The phrase serious talk about the future carried a weight that felt less like a conversation and more like a sentencing. I walked down the stairs. Derek was waiting by the door, checking his reflection. He looked undeniably handsome in his bespoke navy suit, the very image of modern success. He adjusted his cufflinks, a gift I had bought him for our 3rd anniversary. "You look great," he said, but he didn't even look at me. His eyes were unfocused, his mind clearly somewhere else. "We need to get going. Traffic is going to be a nightmare." For the past 3 months, this had been our rhythm. Derek had become a ghost in his own house. He spoke in short, clipped sentences. He took phone calls on the terrace at 11 at night, claiming it was just deal flow or investor relations. Yet, the performance continued. He still bought expensive gifts with the credit cards I paid off. He still posted photos of us on Instagram with captions like "My Rock" and "Date Night with the Queen," curating a digital reality that bore no resemblance to the cold silence of our breakfast table. We got into the Mercedes S-Class. The leather was cool against my skin. As he pulled out of the driveway, the silence in the car felt heavy, pressurized, like the cabin of an airplane before turbulence. "So," Derek said, clearing his throat as we merged onto the highway. "About tonight. Mom's a little high-strung lately." "Is she?" I asked, looking out the window at the blurring city lights. "She seemed fine when she texted me." Derek's grip on the steering wheel tightened. His knuckles were white. "She's just worried about the family legacy, about finances. You know how she gets. She reads too many headlines about the economy and panics." I almost laughed. The only family legacy the Vaughns had was a history of bad investments and keeping up appearances. The money that kept the lights on in Eleanor's condo, the money that paid for this car, the money that was funding tonight's dinner, it all flowed from the reservoir I had filled. But Derek? He didn't know the extent of it. He knew I had money from the sale of my company, but he thought it was a fixed pot that was slowly draining, not a river that was constantly replenishing. "What are you saying, Derek?" I asked, turning to face him. He sighed, a sharp exhalation of breath. "I'm saying, please, for the love of God, don't bring up money tonight. Don't talk about the cost of the wine. Don't ask about the deal terms. Just let me handle the bill and the conversation. I need her to feel like I'm in control. It's important for her peace of mind. You want me to sit there and be silent?" "I want you to be supportive," he corrected, glancing at me with a look that was pleading, but edged with irritation. "Just play the part, Nat, please. Play the part." That was all I had been doing for years. I turned back to the window. "Fine. I'll let you handle it." My phone buzzed against my palm, hidden in the folds of my dress. I glanced down discreetly. It was a message from Lily, Derek's 22-year-old sister. Lily was the anomaly in the Vaughn genetics, observant, kind, and studying business with genuine intellect rather than a desire for status. "Are you sure you want to come tonight? I have a bad feeling about this. Mom has been on the phone all day." A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the car's air conditioning. Lily wasn't prone to drama. If she was worried, there was a reason. I typed back a quick, "We're already 5 minutes away. It will be fine." But I didn't believe it. We pulled up to the valet stand at the glass house. The restaurant was an architectural marvel, a structure of steel and floor-to-ceiling windows, glowing like a lantern in the city night. It was the crown jewel of my portfolio, a place where senators and celebrities fought for reservations. As the valet opened my door, I stepped out, smoothing my dress. The evening air was crisp. I saw Marco, the general manager, standing at the entrance. He was a man of impeccable discretion. He saw Derek first and gave a professional nod. "Mr. Vaughn," Marco said, his voice smooth. "Welcome back." Then he looked at me. For a split second, the professional mask slipped into something warmer, something deferential. He bowed his head just an inch lower than he had for Derek. It was a microscopic gesture, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. "Mrs. Reyes," Marco said. He always used my maiden name when we were alone, but tonight he used my married name with a tone that acknowledged the charade. "We have prepared the private dining room as requested. The chef sends his regards." Derek puffed up his chest, assuming the special treatment was for him. "Excellent, Marco. Lead the way. We're celebrating tonight." "Of course," Marco said, his eyes meeting mine for a brief second. In that look, I saw a question. "Are we doing the usual protocol?" I gave him the slightest, almost imperceptible shake of my head. "No special menus. No comped bottles. Treat me like a guest." We walked toward the heavy glass doors. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with the scent of roasted truffles and expensive perfume. The lighting was low and golden, designed to make everyone look 10 years younger and twice as rich. The soft hum of a jazz piano drifted through the air, accompanied by the melodic clinking of crystal and silver. It was a beautiful stage. It was my stage. But as I walked behind my husband, watching him strut toward the private room with the confidence of a man who believed he owned the world, a voice in my head whispered a warning. Lily's text burned in my mind. Derek's nervousness in the car. Eleanor's cryptic message. I told myself I would just observe tonight. I would sit back, drink the wine I had hand-selected for the cellar 3 months ago, and let them play their little games. I would be the beautiful wife. However, as we crossed the threshold and the heavy door closed behind us, shutting out the noise of the main dining room, I realized that I had walked into an ambush. The air in the private corridor felt different, stagnant, charged with electricity. This was not a celebration. This was a tribunal, and I was the defendant who hadn't been told the charges. I took my seat at the round table, the pristine white linen cool under my fingertips. The waiter, a young man named David whom I had personally approved for hire 3 months ago, approached with a bottle of Pinot Noir. He presented the label to Derek first. Naturally. That was the protocol I had established for the staff, treat the man in the suit like the king, and the woman beside him like the accessory. It was good for business. Men like Derek spent more when their egos were being massaged. As the crimson liquid swirled into the crystal glass, the aroma of dark cherries and oak hit me. And suddenly, the restaurant faded. I wasn't in the glass house anymore. I was back in a cramped, rented conference room 7 years ago, staring at a spreadsheet that bled red ink. That was the day I truly bought Derek Vaughn. We had met at a tech summit in San Francisco. I was 28, fresh off the sale of Brightside Logic, the software company I had co-founded in college. I was sitting on a liquidity event that had put 8 figures into my bank account, but nobody knew my face. I liked it that way. Derek, on the other hand, was standing at a booth for a fitness app that didn't work, wearing a suit he couldn't afford, smiling with a charisma that could power a small city. He had the vision. He had the jawline. He had the ability to walk into a room and make everyone feel like they were the most important person there. What he didn't have? Cash flow. I remembered sitting across from him at a coffee shop 3 days after the conference. He was trying to pitch me on investing $50,000. I looked at his finances and saw a disaster. He was 2 months away from bankruptcy. Most investors would have run. I saw an opportunity. I didn't just give him the money. I restructured him. I took his chaotic ledger and turned it into a viable business model. I paid off his high-interest credit cards. I negotiated with his vendors. When his company eventually failed because the product was fundamentally flawed, I didn't let him drown. Instead, I pivoted him. I used my capital to launch his career in venture capital, positioning him as the visionary while I stayed in the shadows, analyzing the risk. The world loves a handsome man who claims to be self-made. They don't write magazine profiles about the woman who edits the pitch deck at 2 a.m. and wires the bridge loan at 4. When I sold the second iteration of our joint ventures, the payout was substantial. We're talking about enough money to buy an island, though we settled for a portfolio of real estate and stocks. That's when I founded Reyes Hospitality Group. I wanted to build something tangible, something that smelled like roasted garlic and fresh linen, not just code on a screen. But I knew the misogyny of the market. A high-end steakhouse chain run by a woman named Natalie Reyes would get scrutinized differently than one run by a dynamic male entrepreneur. So, I built walls to hide behind. I set up a complex web of trusts and nominee companies. On paper, Reyes Hospitality Group was owned by a generic entity called Aurora Holdings, based in Delaware. Aurora Holdings was owned by a blind trust, and the beneficiary of that trust was me. Exclusively for me. When we opened the glass house, Derek gave the interviews. He stood in front of the cameras, cutting the ribbon, talking about his passion for culinary excellence. I stood 3 feet behind him, holding his jacket while the press called me his lovely wife. I took a sip of the wine. It was a 2018 vintage. Excellent structure. I knew the wholesale cost was $42 a bottle, and we were selling it for $180. The margin was beautiful. I looked across the table at Eleanor. She was beaming at the menu, running her finger over the prices she had no intention of paying. This scene triggered another memory, sharp and bitter as bile. It was 3 years ago, at the launch party for Derek's firm, Bond Capital. We were in a ballroom in Manhattan. Eleanor had cornered a group of investors, clutching a glass of champagne a little too tightly. My Derek has always been a provider, she had said, her voice carrying over the music. He built all of this from nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's a rare thing these days to see a man who stands on his own 2 feet without relying on handouts or inheritance. She had cast a sideways glance at me then. She knew my parents were middle-class school teachers. She assumed my little tech job in my 20s had paid for a nice car and nothing more. She had no idea that the check paying for the ballroom, the champagne in her hand, and the suit on her son's back had been signed by me that morning. That night, listening to her erase my existence from my own success story, I realized something terrifying. Eleanor wasn't just annoying. She was a liability. And Derek, standing next to her, nodding along to her praise, was complicit. He enjoyed the myth too much. He had started to believe his own press releases. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Sarah. I need to restructure the new acquisitions. Derek hates paperwork. He calls it legal mumbo-jumbo. He just wants to sign the final page and take the photo. So, we drafted the operating agreements for the new entities, including the one that leased the land for the glass house. The structure was aggressive. Derek held a 40% equity stake in the management company, which gave him the title of managing partner and a generous salary. But the actual assets, the real estate, the intellectual property, the liquor license, were held by my holding company. I controlled the board. I controlled the bank accounts. I controlled the lease. Derek never read the operating agreement. He saw the salary figure, $300,000 a year plus bonuses, and signed with a flourish, using the expensive Montblanc pen I had bought him. He joked that night over dinner, "Baby, why do we need all these 50-page documents? We're family. What's mine is yours. Right?" "Right," I'd said, smiling over my salad. "It's just for tax purposes, Derek. You know how the IRS is." He nodded sagely, pretending to understand, and went back to checking his Instagram likes. He didn't know that "what's mine is yours" did not apply to the equity split. He didn't know that Clause 7.3 of the agreement gave the majority shareholder, me, the right to remove the managing partner for conduct detrimental to the reputation of the business. I looked at Lily, who had just arrived and was sliding into the seat next to me. She looked pale. Lily was the only one who had glimpsed the man behind the curtain, or rather, the woman. For years ago, when she was 18, Lily needed a summer internship for her business degree. Derek was too busy being a visionary to help her, so I brought her into the back office of Reyes Hospitality. I placed her in accounts payable. It was unglamorous work, entering invoices and reconciling checks. One afternoon, I walked in to find her staring at a K-1 tax form. It was a document that listed the distribution of profits for the fiscal year. Natalie, she had said, her voice trembling slightly. This says you're the general partner and Derek is listed as a limited partner with restricted voting rights. I had closed the door to the office. My heart rate spiked for a second before I leveled it out. Lily, business structures are complicated. This isn't complicated, she replied, looking at me with wide, intelligent eyes. This says you own everything. Mom thinks Derek pays for your lifestyle. Your brother works hard, I said, choosing my words carefully. He's the face of the brand. That's a job in itself. But yes, the capital and the risk are mine. Does he know? She asked. He knows what he wants to know, I answered. And Lily, this stays in this room. If this gets out, it undermines Derek's authority with the staff. It hurts the business. And the business pays for your tuition. It was a gentle threat, but a threat nonetheless. Lily nodded slowly. From that day on, her attitude toward me changed. She stopped looking at me with the vague pity Eleanor projected and started looking at me with a mix of awe and fear. She knew I was carrying the weight of the entire Vaughn lifestyle on my shoulders. Back in the present, I picked up the menu. It was heavy, bound in leather. I didn't need to open it. I knew the food cost percentage on the sea base was 22%. I knew the truffle risotto was our highest margin item. I knew the chef, Gordon, was currently fighting with his sous chef about the plating of the duck. I think I'll have the lobster thermidor, Eleanor announced, snapping her menu shut. And we should order a bottle of Cabernet, the expensive one, Derek. We're celebrating, after all. Of course, Mother, Derek said, his voice tight. He signaled for the sommelier without asking me. He was performing the role of the patriarch, the provider. I watched him, feeling a strange detachment. It was like watching an actor on a stage where the scenery was about to collapse. He was ordering wine he couldn't afford in a restaurant he didn't own to impress a mother who despised the woman paying for it all. The irony was suffocating. I had built this life to protect him. I had constructed this golden cage so he could feel like a lion. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten who held the key. My lawyer's words from our last meeting echoed in my head. Natalie, you don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to make a scene. You possess the ultimate leverage. You are the bank. When the time comes, you don't need to say a word. You just need to stop signing the checks. Paperwork speaks louder than insults. I looked at the heavy silverware on the table. The knife was sharp. The reflection in the blade distorted my face, making me look monstrous. Or perhaps formidable. Natalie, you're being very quiet, Eleanor said, her voice dripping with false concern. I hope you're not overwhelmed by the prices. Derek has this covered. You know, I smiled at her. It was a terrifyingly calm smile. I'm not worried about the prices, Eleanor, I said softly. I was just thinking about the value of things. And who actually pays for them? Derek shot me a warning look. Stick to the script, his eyes said. I picked up my water glass. I'm rewriting the script, darling, I thought. You just don't know it yet. The appetizers had just arrived, a platter of oysters on crushed ice that Eleanor was already critiquing for being too small when the vibration started. A low, persistent buzz against the mahogany table. Derek's phone. He had placed it face down next to his bread plate, a universal gesture of a man trying to hide something while pretending to be fully present. Buzz, buzz, buzz. You're popular tonight, I said, skewering a lemon wedge with my cocktail fork. My voice was light, casual. Derek flinched. He snatched the phone up and shoved it into his jacket pocket without checking the screen. Just investors, he said, his laugh tight and breathless. The deal is closing. You know how it is. They panic at the 11th hour. Of course, I replied. But maybe you should check. We wouldn't want the deal to fall through because you were eating oysters. It can wait, he said, reaching for his wine glass. As he lifted his left hand to bring the crystal goblet to his lips, his suit sleeve rode up just an inch. The screen of his Apple Watch, which was synced to the phone he had just hidden, lit up with a fresh notification. The text was bright white against the black background, and because I had spent a decade training my eyes to catch errors in lines of coding, I read it in a single heartbeat. Miranda Holloway, remember her reaction is your leverage with the board. The scene has to be big. I froze. My fork halfway to my mouth. Miranda Holloway. I knew the name. She was the CEO of Northbridge Quantum, a fintech firm Derek had been desperate to partner with. She was sharp, aggressive, and known for eating weaker executives for breakfast. But why was she texting my husband about a reaction and a scene? And why did it sound like stage directions for a play? A cold knot formed in my stomach. This wasn't an affair. This was business. And in the world Derek was trying to play in, business was often bloodier than romance. I'll be right back, I said, placing my napkin on the table. I need to powder my nose. Hurry back, Eleanor said, not looking up from her plate. We have things to discuss before the main course. I walked calmly toward the restrooms, my heels clicking softly on the polished concrete floor. But as soon as I rounded the corner, out of their line of sight, I bypassed the ladies' room door. Instead, I moved toward the discreet service corridor near the kitchen. I pulled a small brass key from my clutch, a key I kept for site inspections, and unlocked the door to the manager's office. The room was small, smelling of receipt paper and espresso. Marco was out on the floor, which I had counted on. On the desk was the communal iPad Pro that we used for inventory management and Zoom meetings with investors. Derek often used this office as his personal command center when he was at the restaurant, liking the feeling of playing boss behind a big desk. I woke up the screen. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that contrasted with my steady hands. I navigated to the mail app. Sure enough, Derek's Gmail account was still logged in. He never logged out. He was a man who believed privacy was something owed to him, not something he had to secure. I typed Miranda into the search bar. A thread appeared, dated from earlier this morning, titled Operation Glass House Board Strategy. I tapped it. The text filled the screen, and as I read, the air in the small office seemed to drop 20 degrees. From Miranda Holloway to Derek Vaughn, Eleanor Vaughn. Sent today, 4 hours ago. Derek, make sure the pacing is right. The investors are nervous about the optics of your liquidity. They see your wife as a liability. A housewife with spending power but no strategic value. My board needs to see you cut the cord. A man who cannot control his wife cannot control money. The scene needs to be public. It needs to be visceral. If she cries, if she screams, if she makes a fool of herself in a high-end establishment, we have the narrative we need. She is unstable, emotional, and unfit to be a decision-maker in the family trust. That gives us the grounds to enforce the post-nuptial amendment immediately under the duress clause. I felt bile rise in my throat. They weren't just asking for a divorce. They were engineering a breakdown. They wanted to provoke me into a public display of emotion so they could paint me as the crazy, spending-addicted wife who needed to be managed. I scrolled down to Eleanor's reply. From Eleanor Vaughn to Miranda Holloway, Derek Vaughn. Don't worry, Miranda. I know exactly which buttons to push. She is weak. She has always been insecure about her background and the fact that she hasn't given Derek a child yet. I will handle the provocation. You just make sure the lawyers are ready. The girl has nothing to lose, really. Her name isn't on any of the family assets. She is just a squatter in Derek's life. Let me handle it. A squatter. The woman who paid for the roof over her head, the surgery for her husband's heart condition last year, and the very device her son was likely texting on right now. A squatter. The audacity was so immense it was almost impressive. At the bottom of the email was a PDF attachment. Vaughn Postnup Amendment Final.pdf. I opened it. It was brutal. It was a document designed to strip me of everything. It claimed that because I had been fully provided for during the marriage by Derek's business success, I would waive all claims to future spousal support and any interest in Vaughn Capital or its subsidiaries. It cited my lack of financial contribution as the justification. I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from throwing the iPad across the room. If I went back out there and screamed at them, if I flipped the table, threw the wine, and acted like the betrayed wife they expected, I would be signing my own death warrant. They would have witnesses. They would have video footage. They would use my anger as proof that I was exactly who they said, an emotional liability. Miranda Holloway was smart. She knew that in business, the person who loses their temper first loses the deal. She was banking on my Latina temper, banking on the stereotype of the fiery, scorned woman. I closed the email app. I carefully wiped my fingerprints from the screen, though I doubted Derek would ever think to check for them. I stared at my reflection in the darkened window of the office. My face looked pale, but my eyes were dark. Hard stones. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. You want a scene? You want a performance? I opened my clutch and took out my lipstick. It was a deep, blood-red shade called Vendetta. I applied it slowly, watching my mouth transform into a weapon. They wanted to trap me in a corner. They didn't realize that they were the ones locked in a cage with a tiger. They thought they were the directors of this play, but they had forgotten who owned the theater. I checked my watch. I had been gone for 6 minutes, long enough to pee, not long enough to be suspicious. I smoothed the silk of my dress over my hips. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the expensive leather chair I had paid for 3 years ago. When I walked back out that door, I would not be Natalie the wife. I would not be Natalie the victim. I would be the CEO of Reyes Hospitality Group, conducting a hostile takeover of my own marriage. I unlocked the door and stepped back into the corridor. The sounds of the restaurant rushed back in, the clatter of plates, the hum of conversation, the jazz piano playing a melody that sounded deceptively cheerful. I walked toward the private dining room, my head held high. I could see them through the glass walls. Eleanor was laughing at something, her head thrown back, her pearls shaking. Derek was checking his phone again, looking nervous, sweating slightly under the collar. They were waiting for the show to start. I pushed open the glass door and smiled at them. It was the warmest, deadliest smile I had ever worn. Sorry to keep you waiting, I said, sliding into my seat. I just had to handle a little technical issue. Derek looked at me, searching my face for any sign of distress. He found none. Everything okay? He asked. Perfect, I said, unfolding my napkin. Absolutely perfect. Shall we order the main course? I saw Eleanor exchange a quick, sharp glance with Derek. Get ready, her eyes said. I picked up my wine glass and took a slow sip. Bring it on, I thought. Let's see who breaks first. The private dining room was a cube of acoustically treated glass, suspended slightly above the main floor. It offered a panoramic view of the open kitchen, a theater of stainless steel and controlled fire where 20 chefs moved with military precision. From my seat, I could see the flames licking the bottom of copper pans and the sous chefs plating with tweezers. It was a beautiful, chaotic ballet that usually filled me with pride. Tonight, however, it looked like preparation for war. Eleanor sat across from me, a monument to old-school preservation. She had refused to check her coat, letting the white mink drape over the back of her chair like a royal mantle. The room was climate-controlled to a perfect 72 degrees, but Eleanor wore fur as armor, not for warmth. Her perfume, a heavy floral scent that retailed for $300 an ounce, fought for dominance with the delicate aroma of the truffle oil on the table. Beside her sat Richard, my father-in-law, a man who had spent 40 years fading into the beige wallpaper of his wife's life. He offered me a tight, apologetic smile. Before retreating behind his wine glass, Lily was to my right, the only one who seemed to belong to the real world. She wore a simple black dress and kept her hands folded in her lap, her eyes darting between her mother and brother with the vigilance of a bomb disposal technician. The architecture is striking, I suppose, Eleanor said, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry to the waiter refilling her water. She swept her hand around the room, dismissing the award-winning design with a flick of her manicured wrist. But it feels a bit sterile, don't you think so? It lacks the soul of the places we used to go to on the Upper East Side. Places with history. This feels like new money trying too hard. She looked at me then, a small, sharp smile playing on her lips. She was waiting for me to defend the restaurant so she could patronize me. She wanted me to say I liked it so she could explain why my taste was inferior. It's certainly modern, I replied, my voice neutral. I didn't tell her that the sterile design had won an Architectural Digest award last year. I didn't tell her that the new money feel was exactly what attracted the tech executives who spent $5,000 a night here. Derek clapped his hands together, too loudly. Well, I think it's fantastic. Top tier. Only the best for us tonight. He turned to the waiter. We'll take the seafood tower, the big one. And for the mains, let's do the Wagyu ribeyes all around. And bring another bottle of that Cabernet. Actually, make it two. He didn't look at the price list. He didn't need to. In his mind, money was a renewable resource that appeared in his bank account by magic. I sat there, sipping my water, and did the math in my head. The Wagyu had a food cost of 40% because we flew it fresh. The wine markup was 300%. Derek was trying to look like a king, but every time he ordered, he was essentially transferring money from my left pocket to my right pocket, minus the operational costs. You're so generous, Derek, Eleanor cooed, reaching over to pat his hand. Always taking care of everyone, just like your grandfather. It's a big night, Mom, Derek said, puffing out his chest. I want to make sure we celebrate properly. Under the table, Lily's knee bumped against mine. I turned to look at her. Are you okay? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the ambient jazz. I feel like Mom is winding up for something. She has that look. I'm fine, Lily, I whispered back. Just hungry. Lily didn't look convinced. She had noticed the tension in Derek's jaw. The way he kept checking his watch. The way Eleanor's eyes glittered with a predatory anticipation. Lily was smart. She sensed the trap, even if she didn't know the dimensions of it. The seafood tower arrived. A spectacle of crushed ice, lobsters, and oysters. It was absurdly large, taking up the center of the table like a fortress. Eleanor picked up a silver fork and poked at an oyster with suspicion. You know, she began, looking at the shellfish as if it might bite her. The service here is a bit too attentive. Isn't it bordering on intrusiveness? In Europe, the staff knows how to be invisible, but I suppose in these trendy American places, they think hovering is the same as service. I watched the waiter, a young man named Carlos, who was working a double shift to pay for his nursing degree, stiffen slightly. He remained professional, stepping back into the shadows. I made a mental note to add an extra $500 to his tip line later, directly from the corporate account. The service is fine, Mother, Richard muttered, surprising everyone. Oh, hush, Richard, Eleanor snapped without looking at him. You'd eat off a paper plate if I let you. She turned her gaze back to me. Natalie, dear, you've hardly touched your wine. Saving room? Or are you worried about the calories? I noticed you've put on a little weight in the face lately. Stress, perhaps. I'm just pacing myself, Eleanor, I said. I want to have a clear head for the conversation you mentioned. The air in the room seemed to thicken. The clinking of silverware and china sounded violently loud. Yes, the conversation, Eleanor said, slicing into a scallop. We do need to talk. But let's enjoy this food first. The main course arrived. The steaks were seared to perfection. Dark and crusty on the outside, tender pink on the inside. Derek raised his glass again. His hand was trembling slightly, causing the red wine to ripple. A toast, he announced. To the new deal with Northbridge Quantum. To the future of Vaughn Capital. And to taking the family name to the next level. To the family name, Eleanor echoed, raising her glass high. To the family, Richard mumbled. I raised my glass but did not drink. I watched Derek beam at his mother, basking in her approval. He didn't mention me. He didn't mention that I had introduced him to the initial contacts at Northbridge. He didn't mention that the collateral for his buy-in was a property deed in my name. I had been erased from the narrative of his success as thoroughly as a Soviet dissident airbrushed from a photograph. I looked around the table. The crystal glass in Derek's hand was imported from Austria. I had approved the purchase order 2 years ago. The table they were leaning on was custom-made walnut from a carpenter in Oregon. I had signed the check. The painting on the wall behind Eleanor was by a local artist I wanted to support. I owned it. They were sitting in my house, eating my food, drinking my wine, and plotting my destruction. Derek cut into a steak, the juice running red onto the white porcelain. This is excellent, he said, talking with his mouth full, his facade of sophistication slipping under the influence of the alcohol. You know, Miranda was saying that we need to project a stronger image. A more unified front. Miranda is a very smart woman, Eleanor said, wiping the corner of her mouth. She understands what it takes to survive in the big leagues. Sacrifice. Clarity. Cutting off dead weight. Her eyes locked onto mine when she said dead weight. It wasn't a subtle jab. It was a declaration of intent. The jokes about the service, the critiques of the decor, the erasure of my role. It was all foreplay. They were circling, tightening the noose, waiting for the moment to kick the chair out from under me. I picked up my knife and fork. The weight of the silver felt reassuring in my hands. I cut a small, precise piece of my steak. I agree, Eleanor, I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the jazz music. Clarity is very important. Sometimes people get confused about who plays what role. It's always good to remind everyone exactly where they stand. Eleanor smiled, mistaking my statement for submission. She thought I was agreeing to be put in my place. She didn't realize I was talking about hers. The room felt small now. The glass walls no longer offered a view out, but reflected the scene within. The stage was set. The players were in position. And the first act was drawing to a close. I chewed slowly, savoring the flavor of the beef, preparing myself for the violence that was about to be served for dessert. The sound of metal striking porcelain cut through the room like a gunshot. Eleanor had dropped her knife onto her plate, not by accident, but with the deliberate weight of a gavel, signaling the opening of court. The sharp clack echoed off the glass walls, silencing the soft jazz piano that had been drifting through the speakers. The waiter, who had been approaching to clear the table, froze mid-step, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. He retreated into the shadows, making himself invisible. All eyes turned to Eleanor. She was flushed, the expensive Cabernet having done its work, stripping away the thin veneer of social grace to reveal the raw, ugly ambition beneath. She dabbed the corner of her mouth with a linen napkin, leaving a smear of red lipstick that looked like a fresh wound. Natalie, she began. Her voice was syrupy, laced with a poison she barely bothered to disguise. We've been dancing around the truth all evening, haven't we? But I think it's time we speak plainly. For the sake of the family. I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the cool silk of my dress under my sweating palms. I'm listening, Eleanor. You're a lucky girl, she said, leaning forward. Her pearls clicked against the edge of the table. You must know that. When Derek found you, what were you doing? Trying to run some little computer business, struggling to pay rent. You were drifting. I felt Derek shift beside me. He didn't look up. He was staring at the dregs of his wine, swirling the liquid in hypnotizing circles. Derek saved you, Eleanor continued, her voice gaining volume. He pulled you out of that mediocrity. He gave you a name. He gave you this lifestyle, this dinner, the clothes on your back. He elevated you. We built this life together, I said softly. Together. Eleanor laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound. Oh honey, don't delude yourself. You're the passenger. Derek is the driver. And frankly, the passenger is getting heavy. She took a sip of wine, her eyes narrowing. And let's be honest about the one job a wife in your position is supposed to have. It's been 7 years, Natalie. 7 years. She gestured vaguely at my stomach. And nothing. The nursery in that big house is still empty. It's a little embarrassing, isn't it? For a man of Derek's stature to have no legacy. The air left my lungs. I had expected them to come for my money. I had expected them to come for my dignity. I had not expected them to weaponize the miscarriage I had suffered 2 years ago, a grief Derek and I had never spoken of publicly. That is private, Eleanor, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. It's not private when it affects the family line, she snapped. If you are broken, Natalie, if you cannot give this man a real family, then the very least you can do, the absolute bare minimum, is to know your place. You need to shut your mouth, sit down, and respect the man who pays for your existence. I turned to Derek. I needed him to say something. Anything. I needed him to look at his mother and tell her to stop. Derek, I asked. He didn't look at me. Instead, I felt a sharp kick under the table. His polished shoe dug into my shin. It was a warning. Shut up. Take it. Don't make a scene. Mom's just stressed, Derek mumbled to the tablecloth. Just listen to her, Nat. Eleanor reached into her designer handbag, a bag that cost $4,000, paid for by the dividends from a company I owned, and pulled out a thick, cream envelope. She slid it across the white tablecloth. It stopped right in front of my water glass. This is for the best, Eleanor said, her tone shifting to a faux business-like rationality. It's a modification to your marital agreement. Miranda's lawyers looked it over. It simply states that given your lack of financial contribution and your failure to produce an heir, you waive any claim to Derek's future earnings or the capital assets. You acknowledge that you have been compensated enough by simply being allowed to live this life. I looked at the envelope. I didn't need to open it. I had already read the PDF in the manager's office. Sign it, Eleanor commanded. Sign it now, in front of us, so we can all sleep soundly knowing you're not just waiting for a divorce settlement to cash out like a common gold digger. The room was deathly quiet. I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. I could feel Lily's body radiating heat beside me, tense as a coiled spring. I looked up at Eleanor. I kept my face completely smooth. And if I don't sign it? I asked. My voice was soft, devoid of the anger she was so desperate to provoke. The question seemed to short-circuit something in Eleanor's brain. She blinked, her face reddening to a deep, blotchy crimson. She wasn't used to resistance. She was used to obedience. If you don't sign it, she sputtered. Then you prove exactly what you are. A leech. A grasping, low-class nobody who clawed her way into a family that is leagues above her. She stood up. The chair scraped violently against the floor. You think you're special? She hissed, her voice rising to a shout. You are nothing without my son. You are trash wrapped in expensive silk. I looked her dead in the eye and said, firmly and clearly, no. It happened in slow motion. I saw Eleanor's arm pull back. I saw the flash of her diamond bracelet under the recessed lighting. I saw the look of pure, unadulterated hatred in her eyes. I could have moved. I could have caught her wrist. I had the reflexes. But I didn't. I stayed perfectly still. I let it happen. Smack. The sound was wet and sharp, sickeningly loud in the enclosed glass room. Her palm connected with my left cheekbone with a force that snapped my head to the side. The impact blinded me for a second. A white flash exploded behind my eyelids. My ear rang with a high-pitched whine. I felt the skin of my cheek burn as if it had been touched by a hot iron. I sat there, my head turned to the right, staring at the shocked reflection of myself in the glass wall. The entire restaurant seemed to gasp. Through the glass, I saw a waiter drop a tray of drinks. The crash of breaking glass was distant, muffled. Two guests at a nearby table had stood up, their phones raised, capturing the moment the mother of the distinguished Derek Vaughn assaulted his wife. I slowly turned my head back to face them. I tasted copper. My lip was cut. I ran my tongue over the split skin, cataloging the metallic taste of my own blood. Derek shot up from his chair. Mom, he yelled. He grabbed Eleanor's shoulders as she swayed, breathing heavily, her hands still raised as if she might strike again. Mom, stop. That's enough, Derek said. But then he looked at me. He didn't rush to my side. He didn't check if I was hurt. He didn't demand his mother leave. He looked at me with panic in his eyes. And then he said the words that severed the last thin thread of my marriage. Natalie, please, he said, his voice frantic. She's just upset. She's protecting the family. Just apologize to her and sign the paper, okay? Don't make this worse than it is. He wanted me to apologize for being slapped. I sat there, the red mark on my cheek glowing like a brand. I didn't cry. There were no tears. The tear ducts felt dry, cauterized by the sheer heat of the betrayal. I looked at Lily. She was standing now, her hands covering her mouth. Her eyes were wide, filled with a horror that was quickly hardening into something else. She looked from her mother, panting like a wild animal, to her brother, cowering in his suit, and then to me, sitting ramrod straight, bleeding and silent. In Lily's eyes, I saw the exact moment the illusion shattered. She saw the monster her mother was. She saw the coward her brother was. And she saw me, not as the victim, but as the only person in the room who was still holding the line. I touched my cheek. It throbbed. Are you done? I asked. My voice was terrifyingly calm. It didn't sound like my voice. It sounded like the voice of a judge reading a verdict. Eleanor stared at me, her chest heaving. She looked confused by my lack of tears. She had wanted a breakdown. She had wanted me on my knees. Instead, she had just given me the weapon I needed to destroy them all. The piano outside had stopped. The restaurant was watching. The stage was mine. The silence that followed the slap was heavy, suffocating, absolute. It was the kind of silence that usually follows a car crash, where for a few seconds, the world forgets how to breathe. I sat there, the heat in my left cheek pulsing in time with my heartbeat, watching the woman who had just assaulted me try to compose herself as if she had merely dropped a napkin. Then there was a sound. It was the screech of a chair leg dragging against the polished floor. A sharp, grating noise that made everyone flinch. Lily stood up. She moved slowly, with a deliberation I had never seen in her before. Usually, Lily was the shadow of the Vaughn family, the quiet observer who tried to blend into the wallpaper to avoid her mother's criticism. But now, she looked tall. She looked formidable. She picked up her linen napkin from her lap, folded it once, and placed it on the table with a soft pat. It was the gesture of someone who was finished. Not just with the meal, but with the entire charade. Lily, sit down. Eleanor snapped, her voice shrill. She was trying to regain control, trying to pretend that violence was just another form of parenting. Don't make a scene. Lily ignored her. She turned her body so she was facing her mother directly, her hands gripping the back of her chair until her knuckles turned white. Mom, Lily said. Her voice was shaking, vibrating with a mixture of terror and adrenaline. But it was loud enough to be heard in the main dining room. Do you have any idea what you just did? I disciplined a disrespectful child. Eleanor spat, smoothing her fur coat. Something her own parents clearly failed to do. No, Lily said. She took a breath, and her voice steadied. You just slapped the owner of this restaurant. For a second, nobody moved. The words hung in the air like smoke. Then Derek laughed. It was a nervous, wet sound. Lily, what are you talking about? Don't be dramatic. We know Natalie likes to pretend she's involved, but I am not being dramatic, Derek. Lily shouted, cutting him off. The force of her anger made him recoil. I am telling you the truth. The truth that I've been sitting on for 4 years. Eleanor scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. Oh, please, Natalie. She can't even afford her own handbags without your credit card. Derek, don't listen to her. She's just trying to defend her little friend. Lily turned to me. Her eyes were swimming with tears, but her jaw was set. She was asking for permission. She was asking if she could burn the house down. I looked at her. I didn't nod. I didn't smile. I just held her gaze, my face a mask of cold calm, and blinked slowly. Go ahead, my eyes said. Burn it all. Lily turned back to the table, her gaze locking onto her brother. Do you remember my internship, Derek? She asked, her voice dropping to a lethal conversational tone. The summer I worked in accounting? You were too busy flying to Miami for conferences to notice, but I was processing the filings for the holding companies. So? Derek said, looking confused. You worked for the family business? I worked for Reyes Hospitality Group, Lily corrected him. I saw the incorporation papers, Derek. I saw the capitalization tables. I saw the bank signatures. She pointed a trembling finger at me. Natalie is not just the wife on the brochure. She is the general partner. She owns 90% of the equity in the holding company that owns the Glass House, the Onyx Room, and Verve. You are a minority stakeholder with 0 voting rights in the operating entity. You are an employee. Derek's face went slack. That's not true. I signed the franchise agreement. I'm the managing director. Did you read it? Lily asked, her voice dripping with pity. Did you actually read the 40-page document you signed last October? Or did you just look for the page with your salary on it and sign where the little X was? Derek opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a dawning, terrifying realization. He was remembering the papers. He was remembering how I had handed them to him with a glass of scotch, telling him it was standard legal stuff to protect us from liability. She owns the building, Mom, Lily said, turning to Eleanor. She owns the land. She owns the wine cellar you just raided. She pays the chef. She pays the valet. Every single person in this building works for Natalie Reyes. And you just slapped her in the middle of her own dining room. Lies. Eleanor hissed. Though her voice lacked its usual conviction, she looked around the room, desperate for an ally. This is just manipulation. She brainwashed you, Lily. Suddenly, the glass door to our private room slid open. It wasn't a waiter. It was Marco, the general manager. He had been hovering outside, waiting for my signal. But he had decided that the sound of a slap was signal enough. He walked in, his spine straight, his face a mask of professional fury. He didn't look at Derek. He didn't look at Eleanor. He walked straight to the head of the table where I sat. Mrs. Vaughn, Marco said. His voice was deep and carried to every corner of the room. He used my married name, but he said it with a deference that made it sound like a title of nobility. I apologize for the disturbance. I have security on standby. He paused, then added, loud and clear, if you wish, we can terminate this dinner immediately. As the proprietor, you have the right to refuse service to anyone who violates the code of conduct, even family. The word proprietor hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She slumped back in her chair, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Proprietor, she whispered. But Derek said. Derek lied, Lily said ruthlessly. Or he was too stupid to know the truth. Does it matter? The silence in the restaurant had shifted. It was no longer the silence of shock. It was the silence of judgment. Through the glass walls, I could see guests openly staring. A woman at the table nearest to us was holding her phone up, the red recording light blinking steadily. Eleanor saw the phone too. Her face was drained of color. She was a woman who lived for reputation, and she suddenly realized she was starring in a viral video that would end her social standing in this city forever. This is a joke, Eleanor stammered, trying to force a laugh. It came out as a strangled croak. A very funny joke, Natalie. You really had us going. She snapped her head toward Marco. Marco, bring the check. We're leaving. There is no check for you, madam, Marco said coldly. Mrs. Reyes, he corrected himself, using my maiden name. A subtle twist of the knife covers all operational costs. However, I must ask you to lower your voice. You are disturbing the paying clientele. I sat there, frozen in a tableau of absolute power. I didn't need to speak. My assets were speaking for me. My staff was speaking for me. My sister-in-law was speaking for me. I picked up my napkin and dabbed the cut on my lip. The white linen came away stained with a single perfect drop of bright red blood. I looked at the stain, then placed the napkin on the table, right next to the insulting contract Eleanor had tried to force me to sign. Lily took a step back from the table. She looked exhausted, as if the burst of energy had drained her, but she stood her ground. Mom, Derek, Lily said. Her voice was quiet now. Sad. I think the best thing you can do is get up and walk out of here right now before the police are called. Because we are currently humiliating the woman who signs the paychecks for every single person in that kitchen. I am not leaving until we sort this out. Derek shouted, finding his voice at last. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. Natalie, tell them. Tell them this is a misunderstanding. I looked at him, really looked at him. For 7 years, I had seen a partner. Now I saw a terrified little boy in a suit that I had paid for, trying to scream at the sun to stop setting. I slowly turned my gaze to Marco. I didn't speak. I just tilted my head slightly toward the door. Marco understood. He turned to Derek. Mr. Vaughn, Marco said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. Please do not make me ask the security team to escort you out. It would be untidy. Derek looked at Marco, then at me. He saw the cold, hard reality in my eyes. He realized, finally, that the safety net was gone. The audience was hostile. The stage had turned against him. Come on, Derek, Richard said. It was the first time my father-in-law had spoken in 10 minutes. He stood up, looking older and grayer than I had ever seen him. He grabbed Eleanor's arm. Get up, Eleanor. We are leaving. But Richard, Eleanor started. Now, Richard said sharply. Eleanor stood up, her legs shaky. She pulled her fur coat tight around her, trying to wrap herself in her fading dignity. She looked at me one last time. There was no apology in her eyes, only fear. Pure, unadulterated fear of the unknown world where she was no longer the queen. They began to shuffle toward the door, a procession of the defeated. Derek lingered for a second, looking back at me, his mouth opening as if to beg or explain or blame. But Lily stepped in front of him, blocking his view of me. Go, Lily whispered. Derek turned and walked out. When the glass door clicked shut behind them, the air in the room seemed to rush back in. I was alone at the table with Lily and Marco. My cheek was throbbing with a dull, heavy ache. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. But my mind was clear. I looked through the glass wall. I watched my husband and his parents walk through the main dining room. I saw heads turn. I saw the whispers ripple through the crowd like wind through a wheat field. I saw the valet waiting outside, ready to bring them the car that was leased in my name. Marco poured a fresh glass of water and placed it gently in front of me. Are you all right, Mrs. Reyes? He asked softly. I took a sip of the water. It was cool and clean, washing away the metallic taste of blood. I am fine, Marco, I said. My voice was steady. I'm just ready for the next course. Lily sat back down in her chair. She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed. She reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were cold, but her grip was strong. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry I didn't say it sooner. I squeezed her hand. You said it when it mattered, Lily. That's enough. I looked at the empty chairs where my family had sat just moments ago. The space they left behind did not feel empty. It felt clean. It felt like the ground after a forest fire, Scorched, yes, but cleared of all the dead wood, ready for something new to grow. The pianist in the main room hesitated, then began to play again. It was a different song this time. Something slower. Something with backbone. I touched the contract Eleanor had left behind. I picked it up, tore it in half, and dropped the pieces onto her unfinished plate of lobster. The show was over. The critics had been silenced. Now, the real work, the dismantling of Derek Vaughn's life, could truly begin. Derek hesitated at the glass door, his hand hovering over the brushed steel handle. He didn't leave. He couldn't leave. To walk out now was to admit total defeat. And Derek Vaughn was a man who had spent 7 years believing his own mythology. He turned back toward the table, his face contorted in a desperate, pleading mask. "Lily, stop talking nonsense," he said, his voice cracking slightly. He looked at me, his eyes wide and wet, trying to summon the charm that had worked on me for nearly a decade. "Natalie, honey, don't listen to her. Mom's just overwhelmed. She drank too much wine. You know how she gets. We're going to go home. We're going to order takeout and talk about this like adults. Just us. We're a team. Remember? We." He was still using that word. He was still trying to drape the blanket of our marriage over the wreckage his mother had created. I picked up my phone. It was time to redefine the pronouns in this relationship. I didn't look at him. I looked at the screen. I opened the commercial banking app that managed the finances for Reyes Hospitality Group. I navigated to the corporate credit card tab. There were 3 cards issued to Derek Vaughn, managing partner, the black Amex he used to impress clients, the Visa Infinite he used for travel, the backup MasterCard he kept in his glove compartment. Status, active. Monthly limit, $50,000. Current balance, $8,400. I tapped the edit icon. I selected freeze all cards. The app asked for confirmation. "Are you sure you want to suspend privileges for this authorized user?" I tapped yes. Status, suspended. Next, I opened my email client. I composed a new message to Sarah, my chief financial officer, who I knew would be checking her phone even at 9 o'clock at night. Subject, urgent. Activation of clause 7.3. I typed rapidly, my thumbs moving with the precision of a pianist. Effective immediately, suspend all signing authority for Derek Vaughn pending an emergency board review. Attached is evidence of conspiracy to defraud a majority shareholder and intent to coerce signatures under duress. I attached the screenshots of the emails between Eleanor, Derek, and Miranda that I had captured in the manager's office. I hit send. The entire process took less than 30 seconds. In half a minute, I had severed the financial arteries that kept Derek's ego alive. Derek was still talking, unaware that he was now professionally dead. "I mean, look at this place," he said, gesturing around the room with forced bravado. "It's stressful. The lights, the noise. It got to everyone." He shouted for the manager. "Marco." He wanted to regain control the only way he knew how, by spending money, by being the big man who picks up the check. "Marco, bring the bill. I'm paying. I don't want any charity from the house. I pay for my own family." Marco looked at me. I gave him a microscopic nod. "Let him try." Marco stepped forward, his face impassive. He held the wireless payment terminal in his hand. "The total for the evening is $1,240, Mr. Vaughn." Derek reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the heavy metal Amex card. He held it between 2 fingers, making sure the light caught the black finish. He inserted it into the chip reader with a flourish, staring at me the entire time as if to say, "See? I'm still the provider." The machine thought for a moment. Then it let out a harsh, low beep. "Declined." Derek frowned. The chip must be dirty. He pulled it out, rubbed it vigorously against his expensive wool suit, and jammed it back in. "Processing. Declined. Contact issuer. There's something wrong with your machine." Derek snapped, sweat starting to bead on his forehead. "This card has a limit of $200,000. "The machine is working perfectly, sir," Marco said. His voice was polite, but it carried to the nearby tables. "Fine," Derek muttered. He pulled out his wallet and retrieved the Visa. "Try this one." Marco took the card and tapped it against the screen. Beep. Declined. The silence that followed was louder than the slap had been. Derek stared at the little black machine as if it were an alien artifact. He looked at me, and for the first time, the true horror of his situation dawned on him. He realized that the money wasn't just paused. It was gone. The magic trick was over. "My cards," Derek whispered. "Why are my cards not working?" "It appears the primary account holder has updated the security settings," Marco said. He said it loudly enough that the couple at the next table stopped eating their dessert to listen. "Perhaps you should call your bank. Or ask your wife." Derek turned to me, his face pale. "Natalie, what did you do?" "I protected my assets," I said. My voice was low, devoid of emotion. "You said you wanted to take care of things, Derek. I'm just letting you see how far you can get on your own." Eleanor, who had been watching in stunned silence, suddenly gasped. She began digging frantically in her small clutch. I have cash, she stammered. I think I have $300 and Richard has some in his wallet. Richard, give me your wallet. She was terrified. The humiliation of having her son's cards declined in a high society restaurant was a fate worse than death for her. Put your money away, Eleanor, I said. My voice was sharp, cutting through her panic. I have already instructed the finance department to mark this dinner as an internal write-off. I will not have you telling your bridge club that I took your pension money to pay for your meal. I am not taking charity from you. Eleanor hissed, though she stopped digging for her wallet. It's not charity, I replied. It's a severance package. Lily stepped forward. She placed a hand on her mother's arm. Not gently, but with a firm grip. Come on, Lily said. I'll walk you out. Before you embarrass yourselves any further. People are filming you, Mom. Eleanor looked around. She saw the phones raised at the other tables. She shrank inside her fur coat. Lily, I said. Lily stopped and turned to look at me. Her eyes were sad but clear. If you want to stay after you walk them to the car, I said, I'd be happy to take you on a tour of the kitchen. The pastry chef is working on a new soufflé, and he loves getting feedback. It was an olive branch. It was an invitation to cross the line, to leave their side and join mine. Lily smiled. It was a small, genuine smile. I'd like that, she said. Give me 2 minutes. Eleanor stiffened. She pulled her arm away from Lily and turned to face me one last time. She tried to summon the haughty matriarch she had been at the start of the evening, but the foundation was cracked. You may own the building, Natalie, Eleanor spat, her voice shaking with impotent rage. You may own the wine and the food, but you will never belong to this family. You will always be an outsider. I looked at her. This woman who had belittled me, used me, and slapped me. I looked at Derek, the man who had stood by and let it happen. I just found out that's not such a bad thing, I replied. Eleanor opened her mouth to retort, but Richard put a hand on her shoulder. Let's go, Eleanor, he said quietly. They turned and walked out. The glass door clicked shut behind them. I was alone in the private room with Marco. The air was still. The adrenaline that had fueled me was starting to ebb, leaving behind a dull throb in my face. I slowly raised my hand and touched my left cheek. It was hot to the touch. It would be bruised by tomorrow. But as I pressed my fingers against the tender skin, I did not feel shame. I felt clarity. The pain was a punctuation mark at the end of a very long, very bad sentence. I looked at Marco. Clear the table, please, I said. And tell the chef I'm coming back to say hello. Yes, Mrs. Reyes, Marco said. I sat there for a moment longer, listening to the fading echo of their footsteps. Feeling the weight of the phone in my hand, the remote control to a life I was finally starting to live on my own terms. I didn't go back to the sprawling colonial house in the suburbs that night. That house, with its manicured lawn and the nursery that Eleanor so loved to criticize, was a stage set for a play that had been cancelled. It was a monument to a marriage that had effectively ended the moment my husband watched his mother strike my face and did nothing. Instead, I drove to the Arts District, to a converted industrial loft on the top floor of a brick building that Derek barely knew existed. To him, this was just the registered office for Reyes Hospitality Group, a mailing address for tax purposes. To me, it was a sanctuary. It was the only place in the world that was entirely mine. The space was vast and cool, illuminated only by the city lights filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. I sat at the long, reclaimed wood conference table, the surface cold against my forearms. Spread out before me was the autopsy of my marriage. It was not a collection of love letters or photos. It was a forensic audit. I had spent the last 2 hours organizing the documents into neat, damning piles. To my left was the deed to the house. To my right were the incorporation papers for the holding companies. And in the center, the piece de resistance, a stack of bank statements and credit card transaction logs that my forensic accountant had flagged over the last 6 months. The total amount of misappropriated funds was staggering, $8 million. Derek had siphoned $8 million from the operating accounts of 3 different subsidiaries over the last 2 years. He had labeled them as consulting fees, market research, and business development. But the forensic breakdown told a different story. It told a story of chartered jets to Cabo San Lucas, suites at the Ritz in Paris, and diamond jewelry that I certainly never received. Many of these expenses coincided perfectly with the dates of investor meetings he had attended with Miranda Holloway. The digital clock on the wall read 11:45 at night when the buzzer screamed. I knew it was him. I had turned off my phone, so he had likely driven to the only other place he knew I might be. I buzzed him in without asking who it was. I wanted him to see this. I wanted him to see the paper trail of his own destruction. When the elevator doors slid open directly into the loft, Derek looked like a man who had been through a war zone. His tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck like a noose. His shirt was wrinkled, stained with sweat and wine. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with the exhaustion of a man who had spent the last 3 hours arguing with his mother and screaming at bank representatives who refused to talk to him. He stepped into the room, looking around the shadowy industrial space as if he had never seen it before. In a way, he hadn't. He had never bothered to visit the engine room of the machine that printed his money. Natalie, he breathed, his voice ragged. He walked toward the table, his hands shaking. You cannot do this. You cannot just lock me out. You're destroying us. Us. He was still clinging to the plural. He was still trying to hide behind the collective noun. There is no us, Derek, I said. My voice was calm, echoing slightly in the large room. There is just a plaintiff and a defendant. Stop talking like a lawyer, he shouted, slamming his hand onto the back of a leather chair. I'm your husband. My mother, she was out of line, I admit that. She was drunk. She's old-fashioned. But you freezing the accounts, humiliating me in front of Marco, that was cruel, Natalie. That was vindictive. Sit down, Derek, I said. I don't want to sit down. Sit down, I repeated, my voice dropping to a register that brooked no argument, or I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing. And given the current state of your credit cards, I don't think you can afford bail. He froze. The reality of his powerlessness hit him again. He pulled out the chair and sank into it, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. I picked up the first document, the printout of the email chain between him, Eleanor, and Miranda. I slid it across the table. It stopped inches from his hands. Read it, I said. He looked down. He recognized it immediately. Natalie, this is just talk. Miranda is aggressive. She was just brainstorming strategies to handle the board. I never agreed to. You did not object, I cut in. You discussed the pacing. You discussed the optics. You conspired with a third party to provoke your wife into a mental health crisis in a public setting to trigger a duress clause in a postnuptial agreement. In legal terms, Derek, that is conspiracy to commit fraud and infliction of emotional distress. It was a test, he pleaded, leaning forward. Miranda said we needed to see if you could handle the pressure of the high-stakes world. If you had just stayed calm. I did stay calm, I reminded him. I am still calm. That is why you are terrified. I picked up the next stack of papers, the bank statements. Let's talk about the $8 million. Derek's face went gray. The color drained out of him so fast I thought he might faint. I can explain that, he stammered. Investments. Seed capital. You know, I've been looking into crypto and... Don't lie to me, Derek, I said softly. I have the receipts. The week in Aspen, the one you said was a tech retreat. The bill for the chalet lists 2 guests, Mr. Derek Vaughn and Miss Miranda Holloway. I slid the paper across the table. And the Cartier bracelet purchased in Miami, I continued, sliding another sheet, the one charged to the Reyes Hospitality Equipment Fund. I checked my jewelry box, Derek. It is not there. He stared at the papers, his mouth opening and closing. There was no spin that could fix this. There was no charm that could smile this away. You are not a self-made millionaire, Derek, I said, leaning back in my chair. You are a poster boy. You are a marketing asset that I created because the business world prefers to write checks to men with square jaws. I built the portfolio. I structured the deals. I wrote the code for the original product. All you did was wear the suit and read the lines I wrote for you. I worked hard, he cried, tears welling in his eyes. I went to the meetings. I shook hands. You spent the money, I corrected. You spent $8 million of company funds on a lifestyle you did not earn and a mistress who was helping you plot to steal the rest of it. The room fell silent. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchenette was the only sound. What do you want? Derek whispered finally. Do you want a divorce? Take the house. Take the cars. Just don't ruin me. I don't want the house, I said. And I don't need to take the cars. I already own them. Here is what is going to happen. I opened a leather folder and extracted a document I had drafted with my lawyer an hour ago. This is a settlement agreement, I said. You are going to read it, and then you are going to sign it. I laid out the terms, counting them off on my fingers. 1. You will resign immediately from all executive positions within Vaughn Capital, Reyes Hospitality, and any subsidiary entities. We will frame it as a decision to pursue personal philanthropic interests. Derek flinched but nodded. 2. You will transfer your 40% stake in the management company back to Aurora Holdings for a nominal fee of $1. This returns full equity control to me. $1, he choked out. That stake is worth $20 million. It is worth nothing if I prosecute you for embezzlement, I said coldly. Do you want to negotiate the value of your freedom, Derek? Because the sentencing guidelines for grand larceny involving $8 million are quite severe. He shut his mouth. 3, I continued. You will issue a public statement, approved by my PR team, acknowledging that your success was a joint venture and that I was the primary financial architect. You don't have to say you were a puppet, but you will admit I pulled the strings. And what do I get? He asked, his voice bitter. Homelessness. No, I said. You get an allowance. I will set up a trust for you. You will receive $150,000 a year, paid out monthly. It is enough to live a comfortable middle-class life. You can rent a nice apartment. You can drive a decent car. But private jets, the $5,000 dinners, the days of being a millionaire playboy, they're over. Derek looked at the document. He looked at the evidence of his theft. He looked at me. You want to humiliate me, he said, shaking his head. You want revenge? No, Derek, I said, meeting his gaze. I want the ledger to balance. I want the truth to be recorded in the official files. The revenge part? That is what you did to yourself when you let your mother slap me and try to steal my company. He sat there for a long time. I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was thinking about Miranda. He was thinking about whether she would save him. If you are thinking about calling Miranda, I said, reading his mind, you should know that I have already prepared a separate package for her board of directors. It includes the emails proving she conspired to manipulate a business partner's family for leverage. If you do not sign this document within 48 hours, that package goes to her board and the evidence of your theft goes to the district attorney. Derek slumped. His shoulders collapsed. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. 48 hours, he whispered. 48 hours, I confirmed. Take the papers. Go to a hotel. Do not go back to the house. I have had the locks changed. I will see you at the mediation table. He stood up slowly. He reached out and took the folder. He looked at the stack of bank statements, the proof of his betrayal, and then he looked at me. I loved you, you know, he said. It was a weak, pathetic attempt at a final manipulation. In the beginning, I know, I said. I loved you too. That is why I paid $8 million to learn this lesson. He turned and walked toward the elevator. The doors opened with a soft chime. He stepped inside, and as the metal doors slid shut, cutting him off from my view, I finally let out the breath I had been holding for 7 years. I was alone in the dark loft. I was tired. My cheeks still throbbed. But for the first time in a decade, my net worth was calculated not in dollars but in truth. And I was very, very rich. 3 weeks later, we met in a neutral zone. It was a conference room on the 42nd floor of a law firm that belonged to neither my counsel nor theirs. The room was a study in intimidation, featuring a table made of a single slab of black marble and a view of the city that reduced the people below to the size of insects. The air conditioner was set to a chilling 68 degrees, but the temperature in the room felt significantly lower. I sat on one side of the table with Sarah, my corporate attorney, and James, my personal counsel. Opposite us sat the crumbling dynasty of the Vaughn family. Eleanor sat in the center, flanked by Derek and Richard. She wore a severe charcoal gray suit that looked like armor. Her hair sprayed into a helmet of perfection. She did not look at me. She stared at the water pitcher in the center of the table as if her sheer force of will could turn it into wine. Derek looked like a ghost. He had lost 10 pounds since the night at the loft. His suit hung loosely on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. Beside him, Richard sat hunched over, his hands clasped tightly on the table, looking like a man waiting for a sentencing hearing. Lily sat at the far end of the table, slightly apart from her family, signaling a physical, emotional separation that Eleanor had clearly noted with disdain. Let us begin, Sarah said, opening a thick binder. Her voice was crisp, professional, and utterly devoid of pity. We're here to finalize the separation of assets and the restructuring of the corporate entities known as Vaughn Capital and Reyes Hospitality Group. Eleanor's lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson, who charged $600 an hour to look bored, leaned forward. My client, Mr. Vaughn, asserts that his contributions to the brand equity entitle him to a significant severance package far exceeding the allowance Mrs. Reyes has proposed. Mr. Vaughn has no leverage, Sarah replied, not even looking up from her notes. Let us be clear about the ownership structure, as it seems there has been some confusion within the family. She projected a chart onto the screen on the wall. It was a complex web of entities, but the color coding was simple. Everything in blue belonged to me. Everything in red belonged to Derek. The screen was almost entirely blue. Derek Vaughn holds a minority, non-voting interest in the operating company, Sarah explained, using a laser pointer to circle a tiny sliver of the pie chart. However, under the terms of the original operating agreement, specifically Clause 7.3, any executive who engages in conduct detrimental to the company or conspires to defraud the majority shareholder triggers an automatic buyback option. Sarah paused and looked directly at Derek. The emails you exchanged with Miranda Holloway and your mother regarding the dinner at the Glass House constitute a conspiracy to commit fraud and inflict reputational damage. Therefore, Mrs. Reyes is exercising her right to buy back your shares at book value. The current book value of your shares, given the debt you have incurred through unauthorized spending, is $400,000. Derek flinched. Eleanor finally looked up, her eyes narrowing. This is absurd. Eleanor hissed. My son built that company. He is the face of it. You cannot just erase him with a spreadsheet. We are not erasing him, Mrs. Vaughn, I said, speaking for the first time. We are correcting the record. Furthermore, James added, sliding a document across the marble table. We have evidence that Mr. Vaughn used company funds for personal travel and gifts totaling $8 million. We are willing to forego criminal prosecution for embezzlement only if he agrees to the terms of the separation today. Derek looked at his lawyer. Mr. Henderson sighed and took off his glasses. They have you cold, Derek, Henderson whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. The emails are damning, and with the Northbridge deal suspended. It's not suspended, Derek muttered, his voice cracking. Miranda is just waiting. Miranda Holloway sent a cease and desist letter to your office this morning, I said quietly. She is distancing herself from you to save her own board seat. It is over. Derek slumped in his chair. The last flicker of hope in his eyes died out. He picked up the pen. I will sign, he whispered. Derek, no. Eleanor snapped, grabbing his wrist. You cannot just give up. We are Vaughns. We will not surrender to her. Mother, stop, Derek said, pulling his arm away. He looked exhausted. I have no money. My cards are declined. The investors stopped returning my calls 3 weeks ago. I have to sign. He signed the document. The scratching of the pen sounded like a match being struck. Suddenly, Lily cleared her throat. I have something to say, she announced. Eleanor turned to her daughter, her lip curling. You have done enough, Lily, bringing this embarrassment upon us. I am not the one who embarrassed us, Mom, Lily said, her voice shaking slightly but gaining strength with every word. I want to make sure something is entered into the record. Because for 20 years, I have watched you treat Natalie like she was lucky to be in this room, like she was a guest who overstayed her welcome. Lily opened a folder she had brought with her. It was not a legal binder. It was a simple manila folder filled with copies of checks and wire transfers. 3 years ago, Lily said, looking at her father, Dad had triple bypass surgery. The bill was $240,000. Insurance covered 60%. Who paid the rest? Richard looked down at his hands. He did not speak. Derek said he paid it, Lily continued. He told everyone at the club that he took care of it. But here is the check. It is signed by Natalie Reyes. And my tuition, Lily went on. NYU is not cheap. $55,000 a year. Mom, you told me it came from the family trust. There is no family trust, is there? The checks came from the Reyes Hospitality operating account. Natalie paid for my degree. Natalie paid for Dad's heart. Natalie paid for the renovation of your kitchen last summer. Eleanor stared at the papers as if they were radioactive. Her face was pale, her mouth a thin line of fury. She did it to control us. Eleanor spat, grasping for any narrative that kept her as the victim. She used money to buy her way in, to make us dependent. She did it because she is family, Lily said, her voice rising, or she thought she was. She covered for Derek's failures. She covered for your spending. And how did you thank her? You slapped her face in front of 50 people. You are taking her side? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling with a sense of betrayal that felt genuine to her twisted logic. You are choosing her money over your own blood. No, Mom, Lily said firmly. I am choosing the truth. And I am choosing not to close my eyes anymore. You slapped the woman who saved Dad's life. That is not dignity. That is disgraceful. The room fell silent. Eleanor looked at Richard, waiting for him to defend her, waiting for him to put Lily in her place. But Richard just stared at the check with his signature on the medical release form next to mine. I looked at Eleanor. She was cornered, stripped of her moral high ground, exposed as a charity case in designer clothing. It was time to deliver the final blow. I have one more condition, I said. Sarah slid a single sheet of paper toward Eleanor. What is this? Eleanor asked, looking at it with disdain. It is a non-disclosure and non-disparagement agreement, I explained. And a voluntary restraining order. You want to silence me? Eleanor laughed. A harsh, brittle sound. I have rights. I can tell my story. You can, I agreed. But if you do, I will file a civil suit for assault and battery regarding the incident at the glass house. We have the security footage, Eleanor. It is in 4K resolution. And I will also release the financial records showing exactly who has been supporting the Vaughn lifestyle for the last decade. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. If you sign this paper, I said, I will not press charges. I will not sue you. I will not release the video to the press. You get to keep your freedom and whatever is left of your reputation. But in exchange, you never speak my name publicly again. You never contact me, and you never set foot in any property owned by Reyes Hospitality Group. Eleanor looked at the paper. Her hands were shaking. To be silenced by the daughter-in-law she despised was a fate worse than poverty for her. I will not sign it, she whispered. Richard, tell her. Richard Vaughn slowly lifted his head. He looked at his wife, then at his son, and finally at me. There was a profound sadness in his eyes, but also a flicker of something new, respect. Sign it, Eleanor, Richard said. His voice was rough and used. Richard. Eleanor gasped, turning to him. She paid for my heart, Eleanor, Richard said, tapping the paper Lily had put in front of him. She saved my life while I sat there and let you belittle her for 7 years. We have lost. We deserve to lose. Sign the paper so we can go home. But Eleanor started to protest. Sign it, Richard roared, slamming his hand on the table. It was the first time in my life I had ever seen him raise his voice. And this now? Eleanor flinched as if he had hit her. She looked around the room, realizing she was completely alone. Her son was broken. Her daughter had defected. Her husband had finally found a spine. She picked up the pen. Her hand shook so badly that the signature was barely legible. She shoved the paper toward me and stood up. I hope you are happy, she said, her voice hollow. You have your money. You have your victory. But you are alone. I have been alone in this marriage for a long time, Eleanor, I replied calmly. At least now the room is quiet. The lawyers finalized the documents. The stamps were pressed. The copies were distributed. Derek stood up. He looked at me one last time, opening his mouth as if to say something, perhaps an apology, perhaps a plea, but he saw the look in my eyes and thought better of it. He turned and walked out, a man stripped of his mythology. Richard stood up and nodded to me. I am sorry, Natalie, he said softly. For everything. You too. Take care of yourself, Richard, I said. He led Eleanor out of the room. She walked stiffly, staring straight ahead, a deposed queen marching into exile. Lily remained. She began packing up her folder. Are you okay? She asked me. I think so, I said. Are you still coming in on Tuesday? We have a marketing strategy meeting for the new bistro. I'll be there, Lily said, smiling. I need the hours since I'm paying for my own apartment now. See you then, I said. Lily left, closing the heavy door behind her. I sat alone in the massive conference room. The silence was absolute. I looked at the stack of signed documents in front of me. I had won. I had protected my assets. I had silenced my abusers. I had reclaimed my life. I expected to feel a rush of triumph, a surge of adrenaline like I had felt in the restaurant. But instead, I just felt a vast, echoing emptiness. It was the feeling of a building that had been demolished. The dust was settling. The debris was cleared, and now there was just a gaping hole in the ground where a structure used to stand. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city spread below me like a circuit board. The old structure was gone. The faulty foundation was dug up. The parasites were removed. I pressed my hand against the cold glass. It was terrifying, looking at that empty space. But as I watched the traffic moving in the arteries of the city below, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was the architect, the builder, and the owner of whatever came next. And I had a lot of work to do. The glass house looked exactly the same as it had on the night my marriage ended. Yet, it felt like a completely different building. The lighting was still that warm, expensive amber. The jazz piano still drifted through the air with a lazy, sophisticated rhythm. But the tension that had once made the air thick enough to choke on was gone, replaced by the genuine hum of people who actually liked each other. I sat at the head of the long table in the private dining room, the same room where Eleanor had slapped me. But tonight, the glass walls did not feel like a cage. They felt like a viewing deck. Around me sat the people who had helped me reclaim my life. To my left was Marco, my general manager, who had stood like a sentinel when my world was collapsing. To my right was Sarah, the lawyer who had turned my grief into a weapon of mass destruction. Across from me sat Chef Gordon, who had prepared a special tasting menu for us. And next to him was Lily. Lily looked different. She was wearing a structured blazer, and her hair was pulled back. She was no longer the terrified little sister. She was the executive assistant to the CEO of Reyes Hospitality Group. She had spent the last 2 weeks organizing my calendar and learning the intricacies of supply chain management, showing an aptitude for business that Derek had never possessed. To the new chapter, Marco said, raising his glass of vintage champagne. To the boss, Chef Gordon added with a grin. We clinked glasses. The crystals sang a clear, happy note. As I took a sip, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a notification from the Wall Street Journal Business Alerts. I picked it up and read the headline, Vaughn Capital Restructures, founder Derek Vaughn steps down, acknowledges strategic guidance of spouse in early success. It was done. Earlier that afternoon at the district courthouse, Derek had signed the final settlement. It was a document devoid of emotion but heavy with consequence. He had formally waived any claim to the appreciation of my assets. He had returned the 40% stake in the management company that he had essentially stolen. And most importantly to me, he had signed off on a public statement. It was not a humiliating confession. I had no interest in destroying him publicly just for the sport of it. It was simply a correction of the record. The statement read that while Derek had served as the public face of the company, the founding capital, strategic architecture, and operational oversight had been provided by Natalie Reyes. It was the truth. And reading it in black and white, formatted in the stark font of a major financial publication, I did not feel a surge of malicious glee. I felt a profound, quiet lightness. It was the feeling of setting down a heavy backpack after a 10-mile hike. "Is it out?" Sarah asked, seeing me look at the phone. "It is out," I nodded. "Good," Sarah said, slicing into her duck confit. "Now maybe his creditors will stop calling my office asking if he's still solvent." I put the phone away. "Let's not talk about him. Tonight is about us." I stood up. The table went quiet. Through the glass walls, I could see the staff on the main floor pausing in their work to look up. I had asked Marco to gather everyone for a brief moment before the dinner rush fully kicked in. I walked out of the private room and stood on the small landing that overlooked the main dining area. The kitchen. Staff, the servers, the busboys, they all looked up. They knew the rumors. They knew about the slap. They knew about the frozen credit cards. But they had never heard from me directly. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice was steady, amplified slightly by the acoustics of the room. "I know there has been a lot of drama in this building recently. I know you have seen things that usually happen in soap operas, not in professional establishments." A few of the servers chuckled. "For a long time," I continued, "I stayed in the shadows. I let someone else take the credit for the work we did here because I thought it was what a good wife was supposed to do. I thought protecting his ego was more important than claiming my own reality." I looked at Marco, then at Lily, and finally back at the team. I was wrong. This restaurant, the Glass House, was built on a simple idea, that quality speaks for itself. That truth matters. From now on, this is a place where no one is humiliated just because someone else thinks they are richer or louder or more powerful. We serve excellence here, and we treat everyone with respect, starting with the people who work in this room. There was a pause, and then the staff broke into applause. It was not the polite applause of a chorused audience. It was genuine. I saw shoulders relax. I saw smiles. I walked back into the private dining room, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the champagne. "Nice speech," Lily said as I sat down. "I meant every word," I replied. We were just finishing the main course, a beautiful roasted lamb that fell off the bone, when Marco's headset crackled. He listened for a moment, his expression tightening. He looked at me, a question in his eyes. "What is it, Marco?" I asked. "We have a situation at the host stand," Marco said quietly. "It's Mr. Vaughn and his mother." The table went silent. Sarah reached for her briefcase, her lawyer instincts kicking in. "Do you want me to handle it?" "No," I said, wiping my mouth with my napkin. "I'll handle it." "I'm coming with you," Lily said, standing up immediately. I didn't argue. We walked out of the private room, down the short hallway and into the foyer. They were standing by the hostess desk. Eleanor was wearing a trench coat, her face pale and drawn. She looked smaller than I remembered, stripped of the bravado that usually armored her. Derek stood beside her, looking at the floor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. They did not look like titans of industry. They looked like two people who had been locked out of their own lives. When Eleanor saw me, she straightened her spine, trying to summon the ghost of her old arrogance. "Natalie," she said. Her voice was brittle. "We need to talk." "Hello, Eleanor." "Hello, Derek," I said. My voice was pleasant, professional. "I am in the middle of a dinner with my staff. Is there something urgent?" "We want a table," Eleanor demanded, though the demand lacked weight. "It's Tuesday night. The place is half empty. We have a right to eat here." "Actually, we are fully booked," I said, glancing at the reservation screen. It was a lie, but it was my lie to tell. "And even if we were not, this is a private establishment. We reserve the right to refuse service." "You're going to kick us out?" Derek asked, looking up. His eyes were red. "After everything, Natalie?" "I signed the papers. I gave you what you wanted. Can't we just have a meal, for old time's sake?" He still didn't get it. He thought the signing of the papers was a transaction that bought him forgiveness. He did not understand that the currency between us had been devalued to zero. "This is not about the papers, Derek," I said. "This is about boundaries. I am not your wife anymore. I am the owner of a restaurant where you caused a scene and abused the staff. You are a liability. I am your mother-in-law." Eleanor cried out, causing heads to turn in the bar area. "I demand to be seated." She took a step forward, trying to push past the hostess stand. Before she could take a second step, a large shadow fell over her. It was David, the head of security. He did not touch her. He simply stepped into her path, his arms crossed, a wall of muscle and polite menace. "Ma'am," David said, his voice a low rumble. "Please do not make me escort you out." Eleanor stopped. She looked at David, then at me. She realized that she could not bully her way past physics. Lily stepped forward from behind. "Me." She stood shoulder to shoulder with me, presenting a unified front. "Mom," Lily said. Her voice was not angry. It was just incredibly tired. "Tonight is ours. You should go home." Eleanor looked at her daughter. She looked at the new clothes, the confidence. The way Lily stood next to me, not as a subordinate, but as an ally. Lily, Eleanor whispered. You are kicking me out? I am asking you kindly to leave, Lily said, echoing the words I had used in my head 1,000 times. Please, God, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Derek looked at his sister. He saw the strength in her that he had never possessed. He shook his head, a small, bitter laugh escaping his lips. Come on, Mom, Derek said. Let's go. No, Eleanor insisted, her voice rising to a shriek. I will not be dismissed by this. Stop, Eleanor. The voice came from behind them. It was Richard. He had been parking the car or perhaps waiting outside. But now he stood in the doorway. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. He reached out and took his wife's arm. It is over, Eleanor, Richard said gently. We lost. Let's go home. It was a rare moment of clarity for Richard Vaughn. He did not try to fight. He did not try to negotiate. He simply accepted the reality that his wife refused to see. Eleanor looked at her husband. She looked at the restaurant, the warm lights, the happy diners, the world she was no longer part of. Her shoulders slumped. The fight drained out of her, leaving only a bitter, hollow shell. Fine, she whispered. She turned around. Richard guided her out the door. Derek followed them, casting one last look at me, a look of regret that came 7 years too late. The heavy glass door swung shut, sealing them out in the cold night. I stood there for a moment, listening to the silence they left behind. I looked at the hostess stand, at the reservation book where their names would never appear again. Are you okay? Lily asked, touching my arm. I am fine, I said. And I was. I walked back into the private dining room. The conversation had paused, waiting for the outcome. When I sat down, Marco poured me a fresh glass of wine. I looked at the table. I looked at the spot on the wood where Eleanor's hand had rested right before she slapped me. I reached out and ran my fingers over the grain. It was just wood. It was just a table. The memory was there, but the sting was gone. I had taken the pain and I had turned it into power. I had taken the humiliation and I had turned it into a business plan. To the future, I said, raising my glass again. To the future, the team echoed. Outside, the city continued to move, indifferent to the dramas of the wealthy. But inside the glass house, under the golden lights, everything was exactly as it should be. The traitor was gone, the bully was banished, and the woman who had been slapped was now the one deciding who got to stay for dessert. Honestly, looking back, it's wild how much I put up with, isn't it? It felt like a lifetime of quiet resentment finally exploding. Have you ever had a moment where you just knew things had to change, and you finally had the courage to make it happen? I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this. What would you have done in my shoes?